Welcome back, 3L Scholars. So today we're continuing with our grammar notes for what we're calling Unit 1, where we're reviewing something that some of you learned right at the end of last year, and for a lot of us this is brand new information. But either way, we're learning about how to form the passive for verbs in the present system. So that means verbs in the present tense, verbs in the imperfect tense, and verbs in the future tense. In the last video, the last lesson, we looked at how to do this with the present tense itself. Today we're going to look at the imperfect and future, as well as something called the ablative of agent, which is a pretty important thing we'll get to right at the end. So, as usual, we're going to go through this pretty quickly, about twice as fast as normal class. So at any point, if you need to pause and replay something, or even email me any questions, please do. But anyway, hopefully you have out your grammar notes and you're ready to follow along. So for the imperfect indicative passive, remember that whether a verb is active or passive, it still conjugates the same sort of way. So what that means is we can actually go ahead and, when we're conjugating laudo, laudare in the imperfect passive, we do the same thing we would do if it were active. We go to the second principal part, we chop off the RE, and we can actually just write our stem in first. It actually works for every single form. So go ahead and do that. Lauda for all of them. All right? Now, I want you to think back to the last lesson where, on page 1, where we mentioned that our new passive endings, when we showed them contrasted with the active endings, you notice we don't have a tense here. And the reason is that for all the verbs in the present system, so present, imperfect, future, the endings themselves are all pretty much the same. It's just that you kind of add some extra letters for the future and for the imperfect. In fact, we can also put an M here for the active endings for first person singular, because as you need to remember in the imperfect, that M shows up. But for every other time, whether it's present, OST, mustis, enti, or future, bo, bis, bit, bimus, bitis, bunt, or imperfect, bom, bos, bot, bomus, botis, bont. I mean, you see how the active endings are all the same, it's just you add a couple of extra letters before. Passive works exactly the same way. So your general passive endings for the present system are ar, ris, tur, more, mini, intur. So keep that in mind as we look at the imperfect passive endings. So we can just cut to the chase here and say that the endings are the same. The only thing we're adding for the imperfect is that sort of goat sound that we add for the imperfect, right? The ba. Okay? And then, so now for the imperfect, we're starting off with lauda ba, and then we just add those passive endings. So ar, ris, tur. More, mini, intur. Okay? We can do the same thing for a second conjugation verb like moneo, monere. Go to the second principal part, chop off the RE. All right? And we'll do this slightly differently this time just so you can see it. We have our stem, mone. We have our marker for the imperfect, ba. And then we have our ending, So mone bar. Right? Same thing as we have here. Second person singular, we have our stem, it's imperfect, and ris. Mone bar ris. Okay, we can do that for the rest of them. Ar ris tur, more mini intur. Mone ba more. Mone ba mini. And mone ban tur. All right? And as far as how you translate these, remember, in the passive, you're just making the subject actually receive the action. So if this were regular imperfect active, lauda bam, it would be I was praising. But since we're making the subject passive, it will be I was being praised. Right? And then for moneo monere, we do the same thing. Mone bam in the active would be I was warning, but in the passive, I was being warned. All right. Let's move on to the future. Okay, again, future, same deal. We're going to have the same R risk tour, more mini tour endings. We just are going to get our stem by chopping off the RE. Okay, and the only thing is that, I think the future is just a little bit easier to think of as, the ending all by itself. Like the imperfect, we're able to add our imperfect sound and then the ending. For the future, it's a little more confusing if we do it that way. So we'll just add the whole ending all at once. Okay? For some of them, we could do it that way, but let's go ahead and go through and show what it looks like. So we have our stem, lauda, and then for the future, bor, lauda bor. Second person, we have lauda beris, B-E-R-I-S. Okay, and then lauda bitur, bor beris bitur. But do you see how it's still R ristur? It's just that in the future, the future-y kind of grunting sound before the ending changes a little bit. So that's why it's a little easier just to think of the endings themselves. All right. So we have bor beris bitur, lauda bimor, lauda bimini, and lauda buntur. Okay, for moneo monere, second conjugation, we can do the exact same thing. Chop off the RE, mone, bor. Mone, beris. Mone, bitur. Mone, bimor. Mone, bimini. And mone, buntur. All right, and then for the future indicative passive translation, well, if this were active, lauda bo, it would be I will praise. But since it's passive, the subject receives the action of the verb. I will be praised. Same thing with mone bor. If it were mone bo, right, I will warn. But it's mone bor, it's passive, so I will be warned. All right, and the last sort of verby thing we'll have here on the page is the infinitive, okay? So remember that every single time, no matter what, your present active infinitive for a regular verb is your second principal part. So this one's already here. So the present active infinitive that we've known for a while now is the second principal part, laudare. And remember, to verb or not to verb, that is the infinitive. So the translation would be to praise. Okay. Now to make this passive, we just change one little letter. We change that E to an I. And that's it. Now we've made it passive. So laudare, to praise, laudari, to be praised. Okay? Again, same thing with the second conjugation verb. The active infinitive, it's right here. Monere. Right? And to verb or not to verb, that is the infinitive. To warn. Make it passive, we do the same thing. Take our normal active infinitive, and change that E to an I. So moneri. Instead of to warn, it's to be warned. All right. Now, finally, the last little grammar point of the day here is what's called the ablative of agent. Okay. Now, this we're switching from verbs back to nouns and pronouns for a little bit, but this is really important. The ablative of agent is got to be one of the top 3 most common uses of the ablative in the whole language. Okay, and the reason that we're learning it now is you can kind of hear just in English that we've been doing how you kind of expect when you have a verb that's passive, you kind of expect some extra information, like who was it done by? If the subject didn't do it, well, who did the action, right? So in other words, I mean, if we just look up here for a second, if we had an active imperfect, it would be I was praising, right? So okay, that's a complete sentence. But all of a sudden, if we make it passive, lauda bar, I was being praised. Well, okay, it's still a complete sentence, but we kind of want to know more information, right? Like, I was being praised by whom, right? Who was I being praised by? Okay, and that's what the ablative of agent is for. Okay, so with passive verbs, the person or the thing or whatever that performs the actual action of the sentence is shown by the preposition a or ab, followed by the ablative case. Okay, so just a couple quick examples here to show. Over on the left here we have active sentences. Over on the right we have passive. So an example, we're going to change the actives to passives, in other words. So, di Caesarem admonent. Okay, this would say the gods warn Caesar. The gods are warning Caesar. In the passive, Caesar adis admonetur, Caesar is warned, see the passive? He is being warned adis, by the gods. Okay? Another example, Cicero patriam conservavit. Cicero will save the fatherland. Okay? Well, if you make it passive, now patria is your subject in this sentence here. Patria Cicerone conservabitur. The fatherland will be saved by Cicero. So Cicero will save the fatherland will be saved, is that tour, by Cicero. Okay, and finally, urbem delebant. They, we don't know who they are, but we know that it's they from the nt, right? They were destroying the city. Okay, they were destroying the city. Well, let's make it passive. The city was being destroyed ab eis, by them. Right? The city was being destroyed by them. Okay, you hear the difference? Right? And then right at the bottom, I just have a quick little, handy, helping thought here. To convert an active sentence to passive, the original object becomes the subject, and then the original subject becomes an ablative of agent. So we can test this out up here. So in the sentence, the gods warn Caesar, to have that same thought, right, to have the same exact action happen in the passive, the object becomes the subject, okay? So Caesarem, he's the accusative object. Here he becomes the nominative subject, right? Object, subject. And then the original subject in the active sentence, the gods, nominative plural, turns into an ablative of agent, okay? So nominative singular subject, or excuse me, nominative plural subject ablative plural, ablative of agent in the passive sentence. Okay, so we'll get some practice with doing that ourselves a little bit later. But for now, make sure you're going back, studying all these forms, and getting nice and comfortable with how you make the change yourself. All right, scholars, thanks for watching. And as always, get in contact with me, email me, Zoom, etc. if you have any questions. I will talk to you next time.